Well, welcome everybody to this event as part of London Climate Action Week. We are recording the event, so you know, and we'd also really welcome it if you'd like to tweet using the hashtags that you can see there on the screen. If we could go to the next slide, please. My name's Harriet Lamb, I'm the CEO of Ashden, and I'm really pleased to be chairing today's event on behalf of the Blueprint, with which we are a part of, together with this incredible collection of NGOs, research institutions, and local government. Published last year, the Blueprint for Accelerating Climate Action Together. And I'm very pleased to say that since we published that, that's got the backing of 150 councils, the urban and rural, of all different political persuasions, as well as the support of the LGA and London councils. And from that, we've then gone on today to launch, I'm really pleased to say, our paper around the role of local authorities in delivering net zero strategy. And if we could go to the next slide, please, you'll see that the priority, what we believe we need, and what we're really asking of government is that mutually agreed central framework that really does embed local authorities as delivery partners in decarbonisation. That acknowledgement of the key role of place-based solutions as the best approach for many, many different sectors, that we get a cross-departmental approach to working with local authorities, and an acknowledgement of the wider benefits of delivering on decarbonisation, whether it's on addressing inequalities or, for example, on addressing health needs or the needs for jobs and skills of our constituents and our people across the country. And so as we today launch this strategy, I'm absolutely delighted then that we've got a fantastic panel here together to discuss exactly this issue of how can local authorities best turbocharge the zero carbon strategy. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome Eddie Hughes MP, who is of course the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And we're absolutely delighted that he can join us, but especially on his constituency day. So he's very kindly squeezed us in. So unfortunately, he can only stay for a short time when he's going to share with us his thoughts and then stay for just a very brief response from Mayor Philip Glanville, who is chair of London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, and of course the Mayor of Hackney. We will then, after the minister's gone off to his constituency event, we will then move through the panel, which is with Councillor David Renard, who is chairman of the LGA's Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board, to Mayor Glanville again, and then to Carolyn McKenzie, who is Director of the Environment at Surrey County Council. Before coming to all your questions, we'll have 15 minutes to address as many questions as possible. So please do feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function down there, and then we will do our best to answer as many of them as possible. And if not, we'll take them as way as really key issues on which we would like to address and think about some more. So without any further ado, I'd like to move on then to introduce formally the Minister, who, as you will know, has been chair of the all-party parliamentary group on shared ownership and excellence in the built environment. He's had an incredible focus on housing and homelessness for much of his working life, as well, of course, as being a member of Walsall Council for 19 years, which is particularly relevant perhaps to today's discussion. In fact, both those parts of your background are. So I'm very pleased to hand over now to the Minister, who is actually now today, with all of you, making his first major contribution to addressing the role of local government in delivering net zero strategy. Minister.
Harriet, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I'd also like to thank London councils for organising London Climate Action Week and giving me this opportunity to speak today, as you say, the first opportunity for me to speak on this topic publicly. I know you've worked very closely with officials in my department alongside ADEPT and Solace to help local authorities lead the charge in tackling climate change and propel the UK towards its ambitious net zero targets. Climate change is not only an environmental issue, it's a humanitarian one too. It's the threat of increased flooding and displaced families. It's increased winter-related illnesses affecting vulnerable citizens and heat-related health issues, which increase in the summer. It's the air quality threat that exacerbates the risk of respiratory diseases in urban areas and coastal erosion that threatens communities and homesteads. At a national level, the UK is a global leader on climate change. In 2019, we became the first G7 country to put into law the ambition to be net zero by 2050. Through the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, we've set out concrete steps to build back greener from the pandemic and reach net zero emissions by 2050. Now, 7 months on, I'm proud to say we're already seeing this ambition delivered. The 10-point plan is projected to create and support up to 250,000 jobs and mobilise £12 billion of government investment, together with up to 3 times as much as that from the private sector by 2030. Since the 10-point plan's publication, we've enshrined the UK's 6th carbon budget in law, proposing a target that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 78% by 2035, compared with 1990 levels. It's one of the most ambitious carbon targets in the world, and we're well on the way to achieving it. At a local level, local authorities have once again been on the front line of the national response to a global crisis. Well over 3/4 of local authorities have declared a climate emergency. 2/3 have set local targets for reducing their direct emissions to net zero by 2030, and 1/3 have set targets for their wider areas. We're already seeing councils implementing innovative plans to deliver on their net zero ambitions. The London plan includes an urban greening factor to guide boroughs on the environmental ambition of major developments. This will make sure urban greening is included at the start of the development design process. Plymouth City Council has installed solar panels on council buildings that will save up to £1.4 million that would otherwise have been spent on energy bills, and it's supporting 500 fuel-poor households to make energy-efficient improvements through grant funding. The Leeds citywide home upgrade strategy includes coordinating the supply chain for individuals and group buying schemes and building a funding roadmap with the Green Finance Institute's coalition of energy-efficient buildings demonstrator projects. The COVID-19 pandemic has raised many fundamental questions about the way we live our lives. Amidst the tragedy and the stress of the pandemic, communities have appreciated the small moments of calm and peace to be found in local oases. As we've all worked from home, we've spent more time in our local neighbourhoods and built ties with the people who live around us. People's trust in the leadership of local government has increased as they responded magnificently to support vulnerable people and businesses. As set out in the blueprint for accelerating climate action, which London councils helped to author, local authorities are key delivery partners for achieving net zero in a number of ways. Local authorities have direct control and indirect influences to implement many national priorities across energy, housing, and transport. Local partners can use their expert knowledge about their places and communities to ensure that local delivery is optimised. The government's priorities can be delivered in the most effective ways that align with the needs of local people and create co-benefits for communities. Local authorities are able to collaborate across all their functions, including public health, planning, housing delivery, and air quality, to ensure decarbonisation policies result in wider benefits. Benefits such as reducing inequality, enhancing community integration and driving a green economic recovery. Building back better from this pandemic means not only ensuring that new development is greener and better for the environment, but that it supports healthy, happy and flourishing communities. Our planning reforms too put a greater emphasis on better outcomes rather than simply on process to protect and enhance the environment and ensure that biodiversity net gain is met. This reflects advice from the Climate Change Committee, which calls on local authorities to collaborate with communities and businesses, with neighbouring councils and other delivery bodies. Their plans must ensure system-wide transformation is coherent and supportive of net zero. In the base-funded local energy hubs, local authorities lead coalitions to increase their capacity to identify, deliver and attract investment in local energy projects. The hubs have already supported over £60 million of commissioned energy projects and are working on a pipeline of over £3 billion worth of projects. The CCC also urges local authorities to review spending and functions to bring them in line with net zero and develop appraisal systems that include climate impacts. Hampshire County Council has invested in digital tools to help decision makers understand the carbon impacts and climate risk associated with everything they do. The government is working to support councils' investments in green recovery. In March, the Treasury released details of the UK Infrastructure Bank, setting out that it will be an enduring feature of our institutional landscape, providing funding, expertise and capacity to local governments and help them to realise their plans. Now, I've also heard from local leaders about the significance of the National Planning Policy Framework. The framework sets out how planning authorities should support efforts to mitigate changing climate and how to avoid vulnerability of new developments to its impacts. In our white paper, Planning for the Future, we were clear that we want to ensure the planning system supports our efforts to combat climate change and maximise environmental benefits. We will embed this approach through further updates to national planning policy, ensuring that environmental considerations feature fully in planning decisions, including its role in mitigating and adapting to climate change. The white paper represents only the start of an exciting period of reform, and we will reflect very carefully on the views received in considering how best to take its vision forward, aiding our transition to net zero and catalysing a green economic recovery as we build back better. The government is now also delivering wider policy to increase the number of energy efficient and low carbon buildings, going beyond the scope of building regulations and encouraging the use of low carbon materials such as timber, where it's safe to do so, and with a focus on low-rise homes. Local authorities are vital delivery partners for improving the energy performance of buildings. The government has made more than £1 billion available to local authorities for increasing their energy efficiency of low-income households in England across all housing tenures. So far, thousands of homes have been upgraded and thousands more are signed up. By showing this leadership, councils not only drive down emissions and heating bills, they also send a strong signal as trailblazers, encouraging private owners to take action and attracting investment in their area. And finally, tackling emissions at a local level will make a critical contribution to curbing emissions from transport. Considering the different needs of different locations is one of our 6 strategic priorities for transport decarbonisation, and recognises that different solutions will work best in different places across the UK. In all areas, local authorities have a key role in facilitating the deployment of public charge points to aid the national transition to electric vehicles. And as set out in the National Bus Strategy, the government is committed to reforming transport funding to better support local leaders in delivering their priorities. We will better coordinate funding by talking to local areas about their investment priorities and their overall strategy for improving transport infrastructure. This will enable better strategic planning and more joined up infrastructure projects across local transport networks. So there's much more left to do. Ahead of COP26, we'll bring forward further bold proposals, including a net zero strategy that will address the respective responsibilities at national, regional, and local level. We'll also expect to see a clear role for local leaders in the heat and building strategy and the transport decarbonisation plan to cut emissions and create new jobs and industries across the whole country in line with our commitment to level up every part of the country, going further and faster towards building a stronger, more resilient future and protecting our planet for this generation and for those to come. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Minister, for outlining those key points. And I'd now like to very briefly ask Mayor Philip Glanville to respond.
Thank you, Harriet, and thank you, Minister, for joining us. And I know how important constituency days are to MPs, so I'll be really brief. I think what you outlined is that very high level commitment from the government and that ambition in COP year, and I think that's really welcome. I think what I've heard for the first time is a real wish to get into the grain of local government in terms of place, leader, deliverer, enabler, that link to citizen and business. So I think that's the bit that I'm really excited about coming out of what you've said, and that at every step of every strategic document, you're seeing that crucial role for local government. I suppose my question to you is the sort of bridge between that national ambition and the multitude of government departments leading on this, and obviously a spending review, just what you think might be the blockages to us playing that crucial role and assisting your ambitions nationally, but also our ambitions at a local level, as well as obviously the different parts of local government, district, county, city, borough, metro mayor.
I think in essence, what I would say is the biggest tool for blocking blockages is the Prime Minister. His absolute commitment kind of flows through everything he says on this topic publicly, his 10-point plan, and the idea that we set that ambition in law, the fact that we're hosting COP26 here in the UK, everything about it says the Prime Minister is involved. And so he will be ensuring that departments are driven to work collaboratively together to make sure that bids that are put forward in the spending review are kind of coherent and well planned. So I fully appreciate this is going to be a very significant and difficult challenge, but the leadership from the top is absolutely committed to addressing it.
Thank you so much, Minister, and please be assured that at this vital time for the climate, in the run-up to COP26, and as across local government, people are preparing and implementing plans to reach zero carbon, as you outlined, be sure that we're equally committed to working with government to implement net zero strategy and as ambitious plans as possible. And we very much look forward to perhaps meeting you in person and discussing in more detail the strategy, which is summarised. We've put the link in the chat for all attendees to have a look at, and indeed the more detailed blueprint that lies behind it. So we look forward perhaps to having that more detailed follow-up discussion later. And thank you once again for squeezing us into your constituency day. Thanks
very much, Harriet. Look forward to meeting you in person in the not too distant future.
Oh, now wouldn't that be lovely to all meet in person again? Thank you. Thank you very much. And can I also say thank you? I can see I have no need to encourage people to put questions as the chat is filling up with them. So can I really urge you, please, to use the Q&A, because I can see we're never going to manage to answer all the questions in the 15 minutes we have at the end, but it will at least help us sort out which ones to home in if they're all in the Q&A, not in the chat. So. Thank you very much. And now let's move on to our next speaker, Councillor David Renard, who we're delighted is here to give us his views on this vital topic.
Thank you, Harriet, and good afternoon, everybody. As you said in your introduction, Harriet, the Local Government Association is supportive of the blueprint net zero strategy paper, and both organisations share the key messages around local authorities' significant role that they have to play in supporting and advancing excuse me, supporting and advancing the UK's net zero targets. So councils do want to work as partners with government and of course with industries, communities, to transition our places and empower our communities and businesses to a net zero future. Councils are well placed to do this, and the LGA's A Local Path to Net Zero campaign sets out why councils should be trusted delivery partners, reflecting on the functions and responsibilities that councils deliver in their areas. And these are firstly place shaping. Places are intrinsically local and councils are the master planners. Councils deliver quality homes and shape whole environments that are sustainable and provide the right infrastructure, transport, connectivity and services that our residents both want and need. Councils also do purchasing and shape local markets. So procurement is a key power that councils have to deliver net zero. And many councils are already fostering innovation and harnessing commercial opportunities to attract private investment. Through commissioning, councils bring together public, private and voluntary partners, and this helps to shape and develop the market to best meet the needs of communities. Local government third-party spend in the year 2019 to 20 was £63 billion. Local authorities also have a role in terms of problem solving. And we all know that every place is unique with diverse geographies, demographics, infrastructure and resources. And for centuries, councils have demonstrated an ability to capitalise on local assets and opportunities to deliver local solutions to challenges. And indeed, they are trusted to do so. Polling by the LGA found that 71% of respondents most trusted their local councils, compared with the 18% that most trusted national government when it came to local decision making. Councils also have a role in terms of convening and communicating. We are conveners and communicators for businesses and civil society, and we have a long-standing ability to collaborate and build cohesion with local partners and residents, which will be critical for addressing cohesion issues that will inevitably arise in the net zero transition. The Committee on Climate Change says that as much as 62% of the future reduction in emissions will rely on individual choices and behaviours, and this can only be addressed at a local level. Indeed, my own council only yesterday launched a programme to invite local residents to get involved in helping to shape that. We know that councils can only deliver so much on the journey to net zero, and we absolutely have to get residents on board. And finally, councils have assets, many assets. They have their own building stock, and whether it's council-owned housing or commercial and institutional buildings such as retail units, schools and leisure centres. And of course, we're also significant landowners in the UK, having responsibility for an estimated 27,000 parks and green spaces. And developing those parks and green spaces is going to be really important on the health agenda, indeed, as indeed the climate agenda. There's a lot that local government can offer, and this is why we're asking for central government to work with the local government sector and businesses to establish a national framework for addressing the climate emergency. The LGA has also set up a climate change task group to oversee our strategic engagement with government on climate change, particularly in this COP26 year. And the Minister did touch earlier on about government, and Mayor Glanville touched on the issue of cross-departmental working and ensuring that there's a cohesiveness across government policy. And indeed, local authorities are looking for a large amount of direction and indeed funding to ensure that we, as local authorities, can deliver on that agenda. So it's important to showcase what councils are doing up and down the country to tackle climate change, particularly in the lead up to the COP26 summit. So to give a few examples, Waltham Forest Council has retrofitted sheltered housing schemes by developing a new solar-powered system to generate and store electricity. We have the West Midlands Combined Authority Green Recovery Plan, and this includes a number of initiatives from small scale through to region-wide schemes that will be implemented over different timescales and include retrofitting old and cold homes to make them more energy efficient and help tackle fuel poverty. This will accelerate the transition of the region's automotive industry to electric vehicles and also support the growth of green neighbourhoods and natural capital. And an example from my own council in Swindon, we launched a solar offset scheme in April of last year to provide clean electricity to nearby homes. And this is on top of the many solar farms that we have built and developed with partners over a number of years, enabling us to generate roughly the equivalent of all the electricity used by our residential properties in a year. This was part financed by the local community, where residents receive a financial return on their investment. So, as was mentioned earlier, over 90% of councils have declared a climate emergency, and these examples show that many are demonstrating local leadership in the transition to net zero. As the Minister said, there's an awful lot more to do, and it's only by national government working hand in hand with local government that I think we're going to achieve our collective ambition by 2050, if not before. So I'll conclude there. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you very much, David. And as chair of the LGA's Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board, it's really fantastic to have your reflections as well, of course, from Swindon with that very inspiring example. And we're really pleased to have the LGA support for this input into how local authorities can help turbocharge net zero strategy. So let me now turn again to you, Mayor Philip Glanville, as Chair of London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, and of course, Mayor of Hackney, where you've done fantastic work, obviously on job skills and on education. We look forward to hearing your perspective.
Thanks, Harriet, and it's great to come after David. I serve under him on the Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Committee at the LGA. So there's a good bridge between what London Councils is doing on this agenda and what the LGA is doing. And it's just great that you've been able to organise this event with London Councils on the last day of London Climate Action Week. And I think bring together government, the LGA and London Councils, as well as the blueprint writers and the professional networks that have underpinned all of this work. I'm really proud that Hackney is a signatory to the blueprint and that London Councils has been that crucial supporter all the way along. We, I think, heard from the Minister really powerfully about the Prime Minister's commitment. I know that has been challenged a little bit in the chat, but actually, if you go back to last year's London Climate Action Week, we actually had the launch of that 10-point plan from what I recall. So I think it's good that government is engaging with London Climate Action Week, and we will all have our views and our political persuasions, but actually it's going to be crucial to engaging, especially in COP year, across all parts of national, local and regional and mayoral government. My week began launching my own Rebuilding a Greener Hackney plan in Hackney at a local secondary school. And I start there because, while I'm here speaking on behalf of London Councils and Chair of Tech, I think all of us in local government recognise place, community, citizen, institutions, the assets that David talked about are absolutely crucial. They are the challenges, the opportunities and the tools that we can use to tackle it. And they're also, frankly, the critical friends. You know, people want to go further and faster. They want to work with us. They want to co-produce the solutions. David spoke really powerfully about the idea of owning energy assets and communities having that stake. I think that's absolutely vital if we're to get this done in a way that speaks authentically to our communities and speak to social justice. Later on, I appeared on a panel around finance and business. I'm not going to go into that now. That's absolutely crucial. The launch yesterday of the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission, London Council's core cities working together, you know, show that we're outward looking as local government. We want to be enablers and deliverers, but we're acutely conscious we can't do it alone, and we need that private sector investment alongside our asks of government. My remarks are really, though, defining in and focusing in on just transition to net zero carbon and the the Paris Agreement defines a just transition as one that ensures environmental sustainability as well as decent work, social inclusion and poverty eradication. And I think they're really, really important. Too often it can feel, especially as we've been dealing with the pandemic, that this can still feel nice to do or somehow discordant from some of the other challenges, whether that's levelling up, good work, under and unemployment and poverty. And I think whether it's in place or nationally, these things all link together, and a failure to act will actually condemn our communities to the impacts that David talked about. And we know that whether it's in this country or internationally, the poorest are the hardest hit by climate change and climate events. 28 London councils have declared that climate emergency. We have 24 with climate action plans, and every single borough is developing one, even if they don't have a net zero target. So we've started this work, we've got that ambition. And I think most, if not all, are focused on vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. And we can think about the homeless, we can think about those living in fuel poverty, we're protecting residents from extreme weather and impacts of climate change. And that price of getting it wrong in terms of hospital admissions, deaths through heat, deaths through cold, deaths through poverty are absolutely clear. And we also know that if we don't leave behind in our communities on that journey to net zero, the skills, the supply chains, the employment, we won't have grown the green economy. And our recovery mission in London is crucially linked to using this decade to grow London's green economy and skills base as we move through the decade towards net zero, but also thinking about the 2030s and 2040s, the type of economy we need to respond. We also know that discrimination and inequality and disproportionality coming out of COVID, they're the same issues, and that we can't leave behind ethnic minority communities, young people, older people, and those that will be disproportionately impacted. And I think what we've learned through COVID is that we can lead a mutual co-produced response around COVID and humanitarian support. We can connect communities that feel underserved and underheard. So we've got some of those tools, especially thinking about that public health point, about how we can connect this work together and do more with than do to, and also make sure that we don't leave our communities behind. And the only part of government that can do that are local councils. That's the crucial bit here. And when you want to work with business, voluntary sector organisations, it's absolutely crucial that we're there. Some of us are landlords, some of us are conveners of landlords. So the work that we're doing around retrofitting, we've already seen some really important work around sort of shovel-ready projects, the work with the Green Homes Grant. We're really excited to see what comes next in terms of the social housing decarbonisation funding. Some big numbers have been put up. We would say they're not big enough, and that you could probably spend in London that 6 billion 3 or 4 times over on the retrofitting agenda. But Waltham Forest has been leading a programme to really scope out what that journey around retrofit and moving through the EPC ratings are, and what we're needed. And obviously the 560 million that's already been allocated across the country is really important. David mentioned Leeds. I think that work's really impressive. We've got the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea retrofitting homes on Lancaster West Estate. And as I say, Waltham Forest is leading that work around carbon neutral retrofit across London. I do think that we have to be really clear that social landlords have a series of challenges: welfare reform, overcrowding, response to Grenfell, building safety, and now a very clear decarbonisation agenda. And they're unsupported by and large on their revenue position by national government. So it is going to be hard unless we get a financing model that speaks to that we can do those partnerships with business that are so vital. And London, through our retrofit London Housing Action Plan, is talking about signing up to that EPCB average for London, and we'll be releasing a more detailed report in the autumn. And I know the Mayor is also convening an accelerator about a centre of excellence and expertise in London that all social landlords can work with. On air quality, I think we've moved a huge amount in London. We've got the ULEZ expansion coming in October. We've seen actually continued and sustained investment in EV infrastructure even during the period of the pandemic. I think Close to a third of all EV charging points are in London, with a really good network of expertise and data behind that. And then you've seen the work around active travel and streetscape that many London boroughs have been implementing, which is so important. We, as I say, our green recovery mission is about growing that green economy. That is critical to social justice, green collar jobs. And I think green collar jobs, both in blue collar and white collar areas, it's really, really important we leave those skills behind. And the very best energy projects I've seen have led to apprenticeships in communities where people actually feel they're building that change, building that retrofit in their communities. And as I say, the Green New Deal mission is led by the Mayor and led by Georgia Gould, Chair of London Councils. And I know that we're really, I'll finish on the point that I've got no sense that Londoners lack ambition around this. The data that we published last year in terms of polling Londoners show that Londoners across business and community make those connections. That whether it's on demography, on age, on inner and outer split, it's very clear that all Londoners are concerned about this agenda. They want to see their local government taking a lead, and they're really concerned about that just transition connectivity. And this is a cross-party issue in London, and I'm really pleased that across our climate themes, we've got cross-party and cross-borough representation. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about consumer-based emissions, and I think I could talk more about that later, but I think I'm probably close to time, and just really saying that I think it's a really important debate. It may be a Friday afternoon, but it's brilliant that we brought local government together on this agenda.
Thank you very much, Mayor Glanville, and thank you to London councils for organising this event together with the coalition. And I really wanted to echo what you said about the energy of people, not only in London, but up and down the country, to play their part in addressing the climate emergency, and in particular that of young people. And I'm very pleased that we're part of the coalition Let's Go Zero 2030, seeing how can we mobilise that energy for all our schools to reach zero carbon by 2030. Another theme you mentioned, which I'd like to pick up, we have plenty of critical friends here, I'm pleased to say, and finance is emerging as one of the themes, which you also mentioned on. So I think it would be really good to pick up on that when we come to the questions. But first, let me turn now to Carolyn McKenzie, who I'm delighted can join us. She's Director of the Environment at Surrey County Council. She's spent the past 20 years working on climate and environmental issues, including with Kent County Council. So Carolyn, we're really looking forward to your perspective.
Hi, thanks very much, Harriet. I'm also, for my sins, I'm also the chair of the Energy and Clean Growth Group for ADEPT. And I just wanted to say it's really good to be working with partners like Ashden and the rest of the Blueprint Coalition, because we can't do this separately. We have to do this as a joint approach. And for me, having been banging my head quite a bit about the importance of local government in delivering this agenda, to gradually seeing that being recognised by key organisations such as the Committee on Climate Change and the National Audit Office and the other partners within the Blueprint Coalition is really, really good to see. My exam question that I was set was, do local authorities have a crucial role in building green skills and jobs? Now, I have to say that would be a resounding yes, not only because of the fact of in Surrey, the carbon emissions resulting from our own organisational emissions are 0.3% of Surrey's emissions. So we are a tiny fraction of emissions within Surrey, but we have absolutely, as been mentioned earlier, absolutely huge influence. And at the minute, we as a county council, we spend approximately £1 billion a year, which we can make that work. And we can make that work harder than just delivering bog standard services. In addition, we've got, if you're looking at what we're going to have to do in terms of the climate emergency and environment as a whole, the rough estimate for Surrey County Council is between 25 to 30 million pounds to get to net zero 2030. For Surrey, it's 14 billion. Now, if we're going to have to invest that in improving and hitting our carbon targets, surely we then have to deliver on jobs and growth, on welfare, on biodiversity, on flood resilience. We have to make that money work really, really hard. For me, there's three really key roles for local government. And I have to say, I have to give credit for someone who I worked with a while ago in WSP for putting a bit more of a finessing statement around what I was looking at in terms of how we as councils lead, how we play a lead role, how we enable others to change, and how we inspire and influence people. And that for me is our three key roles. So on the leading side and how that links to jobs. So if we're spending that 1 billion in services, and we're spending the money on the climate emergency, then within those conditions, and it's been mentioned before, we should have writ large through all our procurement, all our commissioning and all our contracting, carbon, environment, opportunities, different ways of working, and really push the local jobs, local training and the social value agenda, not just treating it as a kind of tick box exercise, but really working with our supply chain partners to say, actually, no, we'll combine what we want to do on social value with what you want to do on social value and really create meaningful jobs. And I think that also translates outside of procurement to things like our regulation function. So if we're regulating on taxis, or if we're regulating on housing, should we now be starting to say, actually, you need to be hitting this standard above and getting a higher standard on housing, rented, private rented sector, but also on taxi licensing, to start to stimulate that demand and have a real power in stimulating demand for products, green products, services, so that you start to grow that green market. The other bit around the enable, the other bit of our role. So if we're asking through our procurement that suppliers, the SMEs, that the supply chain that we're very close to matches or mirrors or goes beyond our own ambitions, then we need to be enabling them and supporting them to do that. So we're supporting the supply chain to make those improvements. So we have within Surrey and a project that started in Kent, so I can't take the credit for that. We have the Low Case project, which very much was looking at providing training through a STEMS-based program, Steps to Environmental Management, but also grants to help businesses to make improvements, to help them put in EV charging and solar panels and everything else that goes with it, and for taxi drivers to buy EV taxis so they can hit that market. And I have to say, we funded so many EV taxi drivers in Kent, most of them came to work in London. So you've got the benefit there from the programs that we had. So we can use those grants to support the business and the supply chain. And we can also use those grants to say to a business, okay, you now produce this product, can you switch that around and produce a different product, a green product, you know, and really grow that market. So that's the second bit, supporting the supply chain. But the bit that I like the most, and really the bit that I like the most, and the bit that I think local government absolutely have a crucial role to play, is that inspire, and linking with enabling, inspire and influence, because we as local authorities can look across the piece. We can see what other people are doing. We can start to join the dots and link things up. We can start to link organisations like trade associations, businesses. We can link action and ambition. So everyone's doing their own little bits, flying around. Can we bring that together so we've got more? And we can link those disparate pots of money. So someone put in the chat about, can we afford this? Well, we can't if we all do it individually, but if we look at all those different pots and all those different bits of money for different agendas and link them together, we absolutely can start to afford it and move towards a basis of more for less and better. So within that, we can then look at, and there's 3 key examples that I just wanted to highlight, because I'm conscious of time, that if we're going to spend money, we absolutely make it work to get meaningful social value and meaningful jobs. So retrofit, and it was mentioned earlier on. So we're spending quite a lot of money, as many councils are, in improving homes, whether that's through homes for residents who are deprived, or for vulnerable residents, or whether that's an owner-occupier, and looking at different ways of funding that. We're spending quite a lot of money to cut carbon. That needs to address fuel poverty. that needs to then link in supporting independence and keeping people in their own home. Through our GH-LAD project that we've got, our decarbonisation funding with government, we're also working with the supply chain to test heat pumps, providing training to those businesses to be able to install heat pumps and be able to be a supplier elsewhere as well. So there's that kind of almost virtual circle where we can link that up in one project and making £1 deliver many different things, and taking innovative products and working with the supply chain to get more out of that product and expand it. And we're linking that, and there's a couple of examples in the blueprint paper around skills academies. We're looking at this as well in so Leeds and Kensington are looking at how you link this, and we're looking at a Greener Future Skills Academy, which links what we have to do on our carbon, does the apprentices, does the training, does Kickstart, works with graduates, works with volunteers, and then brings that round to create a virtual circle through a Greener Futures Academy, and working with universities as well. The second example that I'd just like to put is on the natural capital side. So I inherited a target of 1.2 million trees when I came into post. That's quite a lot of trees for a really wooded county, in fact, the most wooded county in the country. So extending that towards natural capital and using and developing new natural solutions to flooding, to biodiversity, access and walking and green spaces, and then linking that up to apprentices, like we've just said, and jobs, but creating companies within that sector, but more so using that work to bring people that wouldn't normally be in the workforce back into the workforce, giving them further training and increasing, so working with NEETs, but also we've been working with the probation service. We've got a huge piece of land, Norbury Park, which is one of our pieces of land in Surrey, and we're working with the probation service around all our bits of our estate in that area to do all the work for us, to do a kitchen garden, to sell produce, not for profit, to be able to provide for our food banks, and bringing in people that wouldn't normally be in the workforce, whether that's young people, older people, socially excluded, and giving them that link.
That's brilliant, Carolyn. Perhaps I could, if you don't mind, perhaps we can hold your third example and maybe bring it in response to one of the questions.
It's very, very quick. The third bit is about young entrepreneurs. So if we're working with our schools and putting this in place, we can have a young entrepreneurs program that starts with schools. So there's a company called Pavagen that was a Kent-based company, which was started by a Kent school graduate in his sixth form, and it's making that link and getting those benefits. And I'll stop now. I think I just hit my 10 minutes, so you're okay.
So much. And there were so many points you mentioned are linked up with some of the questions. And in fact, I'd like to kick off with one of them. Oh, Carolyn, come back. About somebody asked a question. You mentioned SMEs, and one of the questions was, that's lovely, SMEs are key in driving green innovation, but they hit too much red tape. What can we do about that? So perhaps a quick answer from you on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's about getting really close. And when we're doing that that engagement at the market value, at the market level, and working with our corporates, it's about really being upfront what we require. So if we're requiring different bits of procurement, then making that really simple and saying, if you do X and Y and Z, then you can access that procurement. So really simplifying what they need to do to be able to get the business, and to be specifically to develop specific programs that SMEs can come onto, and make our procurement policy much more SME friendly, which if that means cutting down what they need. So we can't go to an SME and say we require you to have ISO 14001, because that's just not going to happen. What we can say is we've got this brilliant training program that takes 3 sessions, 3 mornings, that we can run with you throughout your contract, that allows you to get up to BS 8555, so you can start to get onto that program, win business later on. So it's about really making that simple and providing the support as well as the demand.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And I'd like to pick up on another point you mentioned, which was about biodiversity. And there's a couple of questions I think I'm going to put to Mayor Glanville, because they particularly relate to London, that actually quite often local authorities are cutting trees down on the one hand. And on the other hand, there was a great question about whether you've come across any ambitious net zero land use programme for London, sort of acres and acres of land that is currently dedicated to parking. Could we be instead giving some of that over to increasing biodiversity? What do you think, Mayor Glanville? Any response on the tree question?
Well, I gave evidence on behalf of the LGA to the Environmental Audit Commission around biodiversity and nature recovery plans and how that sits with the Environment Bill. I'm really pleased that the committee took up the points that I didn't want to debate with the Minister on it, but I think we need to be really clear what levers we're going to have as local government in the planning process around this. You can have really good ambitions at a national level in the national policy framework. You can have the London plan that was referenced, but there is a huge debate about what is the role of planning committees and planning authorities on this, and do the planning authorities have the skills? I think I said that less than 20% of planning officers have biodiversity skills. It's back to that, what is a sort of green collar job that, you know, where we've seen 75% cuts in our planning budgets during austerity and all of the impact of that. Do our planning departments have the skills necessary, whatever the regulatory framework? On trees explicitly, and we do have tree specialists in Hackney, and I know there's been some controversy over trees in Hackney and elsewhere in neighbouring boroughs. I think we're really, really clear that we do have a robust process in planning to look at the value of trees. We're really, really clear about net gain. And I think we've got a really developing policy platform across London boroughs around what is good green infrastructure and how to encourage it to increase biodiversity, improve sustainable urban drainage, and shift the dial on what I would say sort of marketing green infrastructure and a sort of concrete based nature in its box, easy to maintain, with a much better sort of nature recovery model that can be co-produced with residents if it's regeneration, and making sure that we make the maximum use of those new spaces for nature and recovery. And I don't know really a single scheme that I've certainly seen in my own borough where we aren't seeing now a movement towards net increase in green space and usable green space. So not private amenity space, but actually seeing new public parks and spaces created with the right planting in those settings. So I think it's incredibly important that is there. But I have to also be really honest, we will still be seeing some trees cut down for development, re-provided, because that is the nature of how our city changes. What I hope, though, is we develop better mechanisms for being really transparent with the public about that process, and also designing development around trees where we can. And I think that's incumbent on all of us as planning authorities, developers, and what have you. The last point about depaving, I think depaving is a movement that is really important in London, and whether that's on private land, housing estates, looking at our roads and what are these spaces for. They're not just for car storage. And I think the parklet movement, some of the work that the Mayor of London's done around depaving, has a massively vital part to play, and is far better than planters. We're building in real resilience. A good quality SUD scheme is far better than kind of planters and even some of the sort of streeteries with greenery, because you're actually going into the water table and you're creating something that's long-term sustainable and doesn't require the maintenance that those other spaces have, which is better for the environment in the long run.
I think we could spend an hour debating each of these questions, but as I said, we're definitely going to take all your questions down and perhaps put them into a paper afterwards, addressing some of the Q&As, because I think these are the really interesting issues. And at the heart of all this, it comes down to money. So Councillor Renard, I'd like you to sort of kick off the response that one of the questions was to hear more about the LGA's view on what types of fiscal devolution we need to help finance the zero carbon transition. Somebody else asked, well, how on earth can local authorities do all this at a time of such deep cuts in local authority budgets? There was a question about the UK Infrastructure Bank and whether local authorities can apply to that, or a host of fantastic ideas from charging an empty homes tax through to charging on cannabis or road users. So what's your thinking on the key question of finance?
Yeah, thanks, Harriet. Well, I will come on to the subject of finance, but I think the first thing to say is it's not just all about the finance. It's how local authorities can facilitate and work with other partners. So there are some things that the market will deliver for local areas. Broadband might be an example in an urban area, and we know that good broadband is going to contribute to reducing our carbon emissions. Businesses are very keen to install EV charging points in supermarkets, for example, and councils have got a role in terms of facilitating that, and also in terms of planning, making sure that new developments include all of the necessary infrastructure and are as green as possible. So there are some legislative things there and facilitative things that are business as usual. Similarly, replacing council vehicles. It's something we have to do every 10 years or whatever it is. We've got to make sure we replace the old diesel vehicles with electric and hydrogen. So that's all sort of business as usual and doesn't require new money as such. But clearly there are a number of things where there's market failure, where we do need clear strategy from government and financing to achieve it. And I guess a good example of that is on-street EV charging points in terraced and built-up areas. The private sector is not going to deliver that. So local authorities need the resource on the right scale in order to be able to deliver those sorts of changes that we need. So that does mean we need to continue to talk to government about what it is we need to do, what the priorities are and how it's going to be funded. So yes, we will need some extra money, but I think my key point is a lot of it can be done without the money. And I posted in the chat earlier on what we're doing in Swindon in terms of encouraging changes of behaviour. Again, that's a relatively cheap comms piece to do, but we can achieve quite a lot by changing people's behaviours. I'm afraid I can't answer the question on the infrastructure bank. Hopefully somebody else can.
Thank you very much. And I'm now going to ask Carolyn and Philip if they'd like to respond either on finance or on one last question I'm going to try and sneak in the last few minutes, which was about tackling the gender and racial equity elements of the energy transition. So whether you wanted to respond either to that or on finance, or if you had any other last points you'd like to make. Carolyn, let me come to you first.
Yeah, I think I'll take the finance one because we are very, very challenged in terms of finances, but the key thing is making those links and linking up. So linking up within an authority. So we're working very closely with our public health department, our adult social care. So we're joining up budgets and doing outcome-based budgeting where we can bring that together, which makes the money go further. But secondly, things like having expertise on biodiversity or specialists, link up with your other partners. So it's easy for a county to say that because we have 11 boroughs and districts across Surrey, and we're linking up and pooling our resources. And we're also linking up social value with the private sector. They've got to deliver on net zero. We've got to deliver on net zero. So my key thing would be here is link up and partner up as much as possible and make the different agendas pay for each other's outcomes. So having those linked multiple outcomes.
Thanks very much. Philip.
So I think my sort of point to the Minister around barriers, and I don't know the answer to the infrastructure bank question either, but what has been really, I think, difficult for local government is lots of different pots of money with different rules on different timelines that don't allow us to plan our own strategies and long-term investment. You know, an asset management plan for us, for a housing authority is supposed to be a 30-year plan. You can't just pivot that in response to a £50 million fund that goes live on a Friday and closes 3 weeks later. And I think we need that long-term stability. We also need to be able to access the full tools of funding. So if you get POTS that only a housing association can apply for, or a LEP, or a metro mayor, or those sorts of things, I think we need an almost continuous market engagement, to use a sort of housing term, to allow us to access the finance we need for the projects that will deliver. And a degree, as we always say at the LGA, and the subsidiarity of London, or the subsidiarity of England's local government, is so important to that, because we will all have different priorities and different local economies. And I think our local economies can only catch up and match and bid, Caroline's point, if there is that stability in the system. And the equity point, we cannot leave the end users of what we do paying the price. So I think critical to the social justice element is being able to say and look residents in the eye and say, you will still be able to afford to heat your home with this new technology that hopefully your community has helped install and co-produce, and you'll see the benefits of that with a warmer home. And making sure that that is embedded, I think, is absolutely critically important to the work that we do. If we don't do that, I think it will be top down. It will be large companies. It will not leave any social legacy or dividend behind. And then that sense of social inequity will be sort of inbuilt. And I think that's where I've seen some of the challenges around this work. And it can't just be a middle class debate and discussion. I don't think it is. That's what our research has said, and it's a caricature to say that it is, but it can revert there if we're not careful, and I think we've all got a job to make sure it doesn't.
Thank you so much. And as you say, that is absolutely the key, and why local authorities can also play such a key role in helping ensure that the transition to a zero carbon future is just and is fair, and does leave people feeling engaged and empowered and having other benefits as well as the benefits to the climate. So I'm afraid to say on that basis, we need to bring the questions to a close. I would like to thank so much all our speakers for sharing their inspiring examples and the issues with which you're wrestling. And I would also like to thank all the people in the Q&A who put in also so many inspiring questions and challenges and examples of how people want to contribute to the transition to net zero. I'd like to really encourage all councils and councillors and senior council officers to sign up to the blueprint if you haven't already, to read the net zero strategy paper and to share it. And I'd just like to remind you about that paper. And we've got a quick slide we wanted to show you once again, just to remind you about the key points that we're calling for and that we will indeed be following up with the Minister and with other ministers, is about that commitment to a mutually agreed central framework that embeds local authorities as delivery partners. And as Philip was saying, that is long-term stable, with long-term stable commitments to funding, that is place-based as the best solution for several sectors, as indeed so many examples that you've given this afternoon, that is, again, as you just said, cross-departmental, and that does deliver those wider benefits from decarbonisation, and in particular on the social equity and inclusion side. So thank you very much, in particular to London councils, but also to the LGA for supporting the strategy and indeed supporting this event, as well, of course, to ADEPT and the whole wider coalition, and to all the panelists. Thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon, and we'll no doubt be in touch with some of the answers to the questions that we were unable to get through in that rich debate today. So thank you, everybody, and have a lovely weekend, and enjoy, no doubt, more football this weekend, or indeed the countryside and the trees if you're not a footy fan. Thanks, everybody.